Module 2, Designing APIs. My name is Josh Rosso. I'm part of the services group here at MuleSoft, and I'm going to be guiding you through Module 2 on designing APIs. First, let's get a baseline for the concept of spec-driven development. We discussed in the last module about the benefits of designing an API first before actually building it out. This is often referred to as spec-driven development, a development process where your app is built in two distinct phases. The first phase is the creation of the spec, the design phase essentially. And then second, the development of the code to match the spec. Think of this as the development phase where you're implementing. In this module, we'll create a spec, the API definition, using a standardized API description language, RAML, and then we'll learn to test it with users without having to necessarily write any code. So our goal here is to go through these phases in that inner circle of the lifecycle and end up with an API spec or a RAML file that we can use. This will include the API designer for writing the RAML file initially, using the mocking service in the API console to actually test out and visualize this API, and then spinning up a portal and adding it to the Exchange in order to see and discover this API. Our objectives in this module will be to define an API with RAML, the RESTful API modeling language, mock an API to test its design before it is built, create a portal for developers to learn how to use an API, and lastly, make an API discoverable by adding it to the private Exchange. Let's look at some of our options for defining APIs. There are a lot of different options out there. Some of the most common are to hand code an API design, effectively writing out your own documentation and spec for the API. Another is to use Swagger, an open source project, Apiary's Blueprint, and also RAML. Now we're going to focus in RAML in our particular APIs. And the reason that we're going to focus in on RAML is because RAML is going to provide us a means of designing these APIs, auto-generating the documentation in any point platform natively. And beyond just the design and documentation standpoint, we're going to be able to bring the RAML into our actual applications and use it to generate the skeleton of our project. So it will provide us not just benefits on the design front, but also the implementation front. And eventually when we get into the running app, it's going to be able to provide things like schema validation, query parameter validation, and different characteristics of the API that need to be validated as requests come in. Now that we've seen a couple different technologies that can be used to design APIs, let's double click a bit on RAML and get a better idea of what benefits we can get out of using RAML.